Hi, anatomy students. So this is a presentation on joints. So what is a joint? A joint is basically the articulations of bones, so where bones come together. The functions of a joint are to hold the bones together and also allow for mobility. So we're going to go through and talk about a couple of different types of joints and the different types of motions that we see at specific kinds of joints. So structural classification of joints. So we have fibrous joints. Fibrous joints are generally immovable. And a good example of fibrous joints you can see down here, the sutures of the skull. Okay, there's no movement at that joint, but that's where some of the bones of the skull come together and fuse together, and you have this fibrous connective tissue holding them together, hence the name fibrous joints. Another place would be between the tibia and the fibula, okay, and then also between the radius and the ulnar. You're going to see this really fibrous connective tissue. You don't have any motion, it's more to kind of hold everything in place really well, hold the bones together. Cartilaginous joints have cartilage, hence their name. So they have, they're a little bit, there's a little bit of mobility, but essentially not a lot. Two of the big places that you'll find cartilaginous joints are in the vertebral column, in between all the little vertebrae. So you do have some movement, but nothing too extreme. And then there's also in the pelvis, you'll find holding those two sides together, those two halves of the pelvis together, you're going to have a cartilaginous joint. The last type of joint is a synovial joint. Synovial are freely movable. Most of the joints that we have in our body, and like when you think the word joint, is going to be a synovial joint. And we're going to talk about the different types of synovial joints and learn a little bit more about those next. So there's a couple of significant features for synovial joints. Basically, it's the articular cartilage, or there's articular cartilage that's going to cover the end of the bones. So you can see it's also called hyaline cartilage as well. It's really important that this is on the edge of the bone and so that the bones don't rub together. Okay, so it's kind of this nice, it reduces friction significantly. So it's really important that the bones have this cartilage. There's also an articular capsule that's going to have synovial membrane. Okay, so the membrane is going to hold all the fluid, the synovial fluid inside there. So if you look here, this joint area right here, okay, we have the articular cartilage, which is going to be like that turquoisey pretty color. And then inside here, you're going to have a synovial membrane, and then this yellow would be the synovial fluid. So one of the characteristics of a synovial joint is that there's typically a space in between the two bones. In addition, you'll also see reinforcing ligaments. Ligaments hold bone to bone. So here would be an example of a ligament, and it's going to hold these two bones together to make sure everything stays in close proximity. Other things that you will find close to the synovial joint, but not technically part of the synovial joint, are bursa. This right up here is a bursa, so sometimes there's extra fluid-filled sacs, mostly there to help with cushioning, and it will also have synovial fluid in it. I'll talk about this later, but if you ever heard of someone who has bursitis, that's when their bursa is inflamed. There will also be tendons. So tendons connect bone to muscle. Here you can see a tendon sheath and the tendon coming out. This will connect on this diagram will connect to the bicep. And that's going to keep the muscle attached to the bone and help with the movement of these bones. And then the tendon sheath is going to wrap around. And it's essentially an elongated bursa because there is some fluid. It is a fluid-filled sac. But this is also going to be there to help kind of cushion and support and everything in there. So let's look at the different types of synovial joints. There are several, and the way that we think about them is usually by what kind of movement it is. So this one right here, is called a plane joint. You can see down here in the bottom right. This is going to be found in the carpals of your hand and the tarsals of the feet, where all these tiny little bones kind of meet. It's really non-axial movement, and there's very little movement. It's kind of like almost like these little bones are just kind of like sliding, just like a tiny little bit to help with that motion, but very little motion there. We have two uniaxial joints. So we have a pivot joint and we have a hinge joint. So whenever you bend your elbow, okay, and you kind of like almost do like a bicep curl, that bending, that's going to be the hinge, okay, in your elbow. And then the pivot would be if you're actually kind of turning your arm circular. Okay, so between the radius and the ulna, there's a little pivot joint that helps you to like kind of, it's what basically like whenever you're turning your wrist like up and down, okay, you can feel that pivot joint is going to go through that motion. So let's look at the biaxial now. So that means it has two directions of movement. So we have a saddle joint and we have a condylar joint. These are similar, not exactly the same, but you'll have motion in two different directions. Okay, so the saddle joint is only found in the thumb. Okay, and that's why humans are so special, because we have these thumbs that are able to do a lot of different motion, and that's due to our saddle joint. One of the perks of being a human is that opposable thumb. And then in between our metacarpals and our phalanx, you can find these condylar joints. Okay, so there's a little bit of motion. Not a lot, like all the same, all like different directions, but you definitely get two axes there. Multi-axial, this is going to be an example. This would be the ball and socket. This is one that you find in your shoulder. Also, you have, and this is going to have multiple directions. So if you think about how your shoulder moves, you can go pretty much almost any direction with that. So multi-axial, you get a lot of range of motion. So let's look at a couple of conditions associated with joints. I did mention bursitis earlier, so that would be the inflammation of a bursa, typically caused by blow or too much friction, sometimes seen in like athletes or people who are very active. Tendinitis, another one, you see in a lot of athletes as well. So this would be just the inflammation of tendon sheaths. Okay, so, and as I said before, tendon sheaths are a special kind of bursa, so very similar. You can also get some inflammation or kind of some tearing and things that happen actually in the tendons as well. So here, if you look at this picture, you can see there's little micro tears and then just inflammation associated with that repair. Arthritis, there's a couple of different types of arthritis, but it's pretty widespread in the United States, and you usually associate it with people as they get older, but not necessarily. It depends on the type, and a lot of people will feel like pain, stiffness, or swelling. A couple of different types that you can get. You can have osteoarthritis. Okay, so osteoarthritis is basically when you have eroded cartilage and you have bone rubbing on bone, which is very painful. So that articular cartilage or that specialized hyaline cartilage is really important to keep the bones from rubbing together on each other. And sometimes when you get older, that tends to wear away and it can be quite painful. So rheumatoid arthritis, this is an autoimmune kind of breakdown of the joint. So your body actually attacks itself, and that can be quite painful. And then gouty arthritis is another kind. This would be more of the buildup of minerals that actually occur in the joint. A lot of times you see that this happens in the foot. It can be quite painful as well. So I think that is everything. We will, so please bring questions with you next time to class, and I will talk to you guys then. Have a good day, guys.